Hello and welcome to the video version of the award-winning Happier at Work podcast. My guest today is Marta Smullen, and the whole approach that we're taking with today's episode is someone who is living in a country where they don't speak the native language. So they're not a native speaker of the country where they live. Very applicable for me living in Spain at the moment. Spanish, should I say, is not my first language. I can speak Spanish, but it's still not my first language. So Marta is Polish and she moved to Ireland nearly 20 years ago with no English whatsoever. Now, I say we're focusing on the language side of things, but really the insights that we talk about, things like getting out of your comfort zone, things like what happens when you fail, what kind of things do you need to do then, finding the confidence and what that actually means, and the whole part of it being a journey as well. We're talking specifically about language, but the reality is all of the insights from today's episode can be applied no matter what you're talking about, whatever the skill that you're trying to learn, whatever the situation that you find yourself in. I know that you're going to find some nuggets of wisdom in today's episode. Do let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Marta, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I know we have been talking about this for a while, so I'm really glad the day has finally arrived for us to be able to do this podcast together. Do you want to let people know a little bit about you, your career history, what got you into being interested in things that you're interested in doing today?
Hi, Aoife. So lovely to be here. I was also waiting for this day impatiently. Thanks very much for having me here. So my name is Marta Smullen and I am Polish, but I live in Ireland now for nearly half of my life. So I moved here when I was 18, and this September I'm going to be celebrating 18 years in Ireland.
Wow.
I'm finance professional. I've been in the leadership position now for a good couple of years. And I came here, as I said, when I was 18. But the one thing is I didn't speak any English at all. And one might think like how it came to it and why did I come here? So in school I've learned German, and when you're in school you're kind of focusing on the language you're going to be doing on your living search. So I was
Yeah.
doing German, so I didn't really, the two phrases I could say was my name is Marta Smullen, I don't speak English. That was the two
Yeah.
things I could say.
That's all you
And
need, I think, when you're starting out.
well, as it turns out, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I came here because my whole family moved here for economic reasons, really, to
Yeah.
look for
I think
better
at
life.
that time in Ireland's history was a time when there were a lot of Polish people coming to Ireland
Yes.
then, or maybe even before then as well.
Yeah, my dad came here, I think, 2 years before me. He was the first one to emigrate, and he came in like 2 months before the borders open. So that was the time when everyone was moving to Ireland, and then my family slowly followed. I was the last one. I was really, 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 really didn't want to do it, and nobody really forced me.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to stay on my own. I was afraid to stay on my own in Poland, so I decided to come here to Ireland. I was really unhappy about it at first. I'm really glad that I did. I'm really glad
Yeah.
that
And
my
look at you
life turned
now,
out.
18
I
years
know.
later. Yeah. Amazing.
I know. Oh, we all still here. We all still here. Irish citizens at this point.
Hmm.
um,
And I know one of the things that we wanted to touch on today's podcast was this idea of English not being your
yeah.
first language, or at the very least arriving in Ireland without a word of English, or with two key phrases that kind of caught you by, like, I don't speak English. So, yeah. But I suppose I'd love to understand more about that experience that you had of coming
Mm.
to another place without the language, and now 18, almost 18 years later, really successful career behind you, and clearly you can speak English really, really well. So talk to me a little bit about that journey.
It's been a long journey. It's been a very difficult journey. The good thing is, and I don't want to jump straight to a conclusion on this, but the good thing about it is that it's all our mindset and how we position ourselves with the steps we want to take, how much we want to challenge ourselves, and how much we want to put ourselves outside our comfort zone. Um, So when I came here, as I said, I didn't speak any English. I've given myself 1 year to study it, and then I went to college. And again, I was still very, very, very bad at it. But I had to put myself outside my comfort zone, and also I had to get education. I knew it. That was the key. When I came here as an 18-year-old, I just finished my Living Cert in Poland, and I knew that I need to carry on with my education. I need to get third level like education. So I got my degree. Then I moved on, did my chartered exams for accountancy, which I'm really, really glad I did. I found myself a first job. Um, and that it's one of those things that you probably don't see how much you're improving, but you just have to kind of 18 years now I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, actually I'm not that bad at it. But it didn't happen. It's a long, very long process
Mhm.
whereby you just nearly have to power through, and you just need to try new things, apply for new jobs, and just put that aside. I think at a certain point I made a very conscious decision to blend myself within the Irish culture and
Mm.
try to not to close myself within the Polish culture. Because
Yeah.
as you said, there was a lot of Polish people came over, and at that time it was very easy to, work with Polish people. It was live with Polish people, only speaking Polish, go only to Polish shops and things
Mhm.
like that. And I consciously was challenging myself to really get new friends. As 18, I was a teenager, really. I was like, get new friends, and they needed to be speaking English. Like they couldn't be Polish. Like I didn't
Mm.
mind if they were Irish, or I didn't mind where they were from, as long as it forced me to speak English. I've joined a gym. See, there you go. There's my English kicking in. Um, where I had to go in and I had to speak English. So it's that idea of forcing yourself
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah.
And
So
I
putting
don't,
yourself in the situations where you have to speak the language,
yeah.
basically. And like, I suppose for anyone listening, this applies because this is a global audience. It's not just in Ireland, but I'm sure
Mm,
there's a lot of people living in Ireland who don't have English as their first language and who have those same types of experiences. And I know certainly from all of the travels that I've done, and the tendency to stick with other Irish people because it's something that's
mm,
familiar and you can speak the same language and you get the same jokes and the same references and things like that. The temptation to do something like that is really strong. Now that I'm living most of my time in Tenerife and I'm speaking Spanish all the time, I'm in at the deep end as well. And it is that feeling of like, I remember when I first started learning languages back in university, I was just so self conscious and so embarrassed. And I'm
hmm
such a perfectionist that I was like thinking of the grammar in my head before saying something rather than just trying to get my point across, just trying to
Yeah.
communicate in some way with the additional use of like now I'm like, well, I'll use my hand gestures as well to try and like, this is what I'm trying to say. But really, the focus should be on the point that you're trying to make as opposed to saying the exact words in exactly the right order in the correct pronunciation and the right way. I think we have a tendency, well, me certainly as a perfectionist, the tendency to focus so much on getting it right rather than communicating the message.
Absolutely. And I think you touched there on the embarrassment. And that's
Mm,
exactly anyone who've been in my shoes or lived that, and you did as well, as an Irish person living in Spain, knows that feeling when you walk into a room and you're thinking, oh God, what do I say? How do I say it? Do they understand me? And when people don't understand you, they might be smiling and nodding, but when they don't understand you, you know that
no,
feeling.
no
And I
further
remember,
questions.
yeah.
Yeah, you're like, okay, I understand. No further questions required.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh God, I know I'm much smarter. I know I'm much funnier. I'm not coming across the way I want to come across. And
Yeah.
and you need to really get rid of that. This phrase, embarrassment is a cost of entry. It's really, really the
Mm,
truth. With everything, we really try it's in our nature to try our best. But I think this idea of dropping that perfectionist and dropping this guard down and being a little bit, I'm just going to go and do my best and talk with my hands like that.
yeah.
It's quite. it's really what needs to be done, because you can't master something without being bad at it
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Mm.
I look at my children now, and they're 6 and 3, and I'm trying to learn from them how to approach things. And this is really relevant to also learning a language. Is like
Mm.
they just try, and they try again, and they try again, and
Yeah.
then they succeed, and they're like happy that they succeeded. They don't dwell on the 10 times it didn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's important here too. Like, don't dwell on times when you said something wrong and you embarrass yourself. So be it. Nobody dies.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just move on.
If
Um
only my 22-year-old self
oh, I
could know
know.
that. Yeah. You know.
I know. Absolutely. But I tell you a funny story. I was in my early 20s. So when I came to Ireland, I had braces. I put braces in, and I was at the orthodontist office, like on the orthodontist place, like, every month or every 2 months
Mm.
for like 2 years. And I randomly met him, like, I think a month ago.
Yeah.
And I just, wave, being myself. I'm like, hi, how are you doing? And the first thing he said, he's like, Jesus, your English got so much better.
Yeah.
That's
It's
the
so
first thing
funny,
he
isn't
said to
it?
me. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay. So I actually don't realize how it was back then, because
Yeah.
now, and I think often I'm going to refer to Polish people who live in Ireland, but in generally speaking, when you live in a country where you don't speak your native language, you often think to yourself, when my English is better, I do this.
Yeah.
If my English gets better, I apply for that promotion or apply for that job.
Yeah.
I don't know whether if and when is coming, because if you're the judge of it, I think we could be the biggest critics of ourselves,
Mm.
and that if and when might not be coming. And it's not really the language is the problem here, is your mindset, and
Yeah.
that's what you need to really change. Is the mindset that you need to change, not the language. It's probably, if you can communicate, you can do the job. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would be really in kind of trying to think about it, of trying to change the mindset, rather than, you can always keep improving on your skills, but you really need to think about it differently.
Yeah, and I think, Marta, everything that you're saying can be applied across the board. So this whole embarrassment and trying and then failing in our
Mm,
own kind of thoughts. We're like, oh, I've you were dwelling on some mistake that we've
yeah.
made or whatever that might be. This applies like not just when you're speaking a language or learning a new language or trying to communicate with someone. This applies with everything that we're doing. And then the same, we hold ourselves back. I'll be happy when something happens. I'll be happy
Yeah.
when I get the promotion. I'll be happy, or I'll apply for that job when I feel more confident. I'll apply for that. And it's always, we're deferring to the future. But actually, if you want something now, what steps do you need to take right now in order to make that a reality? And, like what you were saying, you don't have to have the language so long as you can communicate. There probably are some jobs where you have to have technical language or you have to have a really good grasp of English. But for the most part, I think you can at least get started with looking for something when you don't. And again, this is not just about language. This can be for any
Mm.
skills, whether they're technical skills, whether they are soft skills or critical skills, whatever you want to call them. It just start now, basically, just get
Mm.
going.
And the failure there, you touched there on the failure, and I've thought about it a lot recently. I think I'm reaching some sort of midlife crisis or something, and I think about it a lot. And the way I'm trying to approach things now, and again, I wish I knew it when I was 20, or thought about it in that way when I was 20. But what are we actually fearful of? Because are we fearing to fail, or are we fearing to fail in front of others, and
Mm,
that people will see us? And if I were to say that you can try this one thing you really, really want to try, but nobody will know. Nobody will ever find out whether you failed or not. Would you try it? And I can probably say that most people would say, yes, I will definitely try it. So if that's the case, you're not really fearful of failing. You are fearing other people seeing you fail. And
yeah.
every so often now, when I'm approaching this maybe more difficult situation when I have to put myself outside my comfort zone. And that's my new thing. I just put constantly myself outside my comfort zone now, because life is way too short, as I'm realizing. So, and if there is anything that I'm like, oh, I don't know, I just think to myself, okay, if nobody was looking, would I try this? And if the answer is yes, then I'm doing it,
Yeah.
regardless of how scared I am. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Even with the language perspective, like, you're not doing that for anyone else. You're
Mm.
doing that for yourself. Why are you doing this? What's your why? For me, I knew I have to challenge myself, and I have to apply for different jobs, apply for the promotions, take the opportunities that were put in front of me. Because, you know, the reason why Polish people came 20 years ago to Ireland, it wasn't for, for recreation, what's the word? For having fun or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was for money. It was
Yeah.
simply like that. My parents moved to Ireland simply looking for a better environment for all of us, for the children,
Mm.
for myself. So I have this, thankfully we never were really bad with money, but it was coming to it, and my parents, my dad reacted on time. But what I'm trying to say, my why was always to never be in that situation. So I knew I
Yeah.
have to get myself a good education. I knew I have to go to college, and I knew I have to get myself a good job and be on a decent pay, because I never wanted to repeat that. And I think once you know what your why is or why you're doing it, it's easier to do it. Because if the why is, it's that important to you, then the cost of embarrassment, it's kind of minimum. The cost of embarrassment is kind of small. It gets smaller and smaller. The
Yeah.
fear of that.
Yeah. There's so many things that you're talking about there that are just kind of so relevant for what I talk about as well. And
Mm.
if I think about imposter syndrome specifically and how we're so afraid of how other people perceive us, like it's one of our deep seated fears, I think, of how we are
Yeah.
perceived by other people. And interestingly, there's a podcast that I recorded at the time of this recording that hasn't yet been released yet, but we look into the Enneagram and the foundation of what our motivators are at work or in life. And I
Mm.
think from my discussion with Ronan, is his name Ronan Gallagher, the perfectionism is really coming through. And it's like, it's anything that's not done right is perceived as a failure. And so, in front of the eyes of others, I think that I will look like a failure if I don't get everything 100% right. And different people will have different motivators or different triggers for them that make them do the kinds of things that they do. But I love this idea of having a why behind everything that you're doing. And building on the point that we were talking about earlier about taking action and not waiting until a certain time. And oftentimes we think we're going to feel confident before we take action, or we're going to feel motivated before we take action. But actually, those come as byproducts of taking action. You need to take the action first. You might have some setbacks rather than failures. So things that you
Yeah.
learn along the way, but it's all part of a journey. And there is no dichotomy of success and failure. It's all like, here's a setback. Okay, what would I do differently the next time? How do I get back on track? Or what can I learn from this experience? But coming back to this idea of why, and why do you take that action to begin with, it's so important to understand that and to find what that means for you. And I love that you have that deep seated, like, I never want to be in this situation ever. So this is why I'm pushing myself out of
Mm.
my comfort zone. This is why I'm applying for those jobs. This is why I'm improving my English, surrounding myself with English speakers rather than just Polish speakers. So I think trying to tap into that for each individual person to know, okay, why is it that I'm trying to achieve what it is I'm trying to achieve? Knowing that, I think, and being able to take those steps with that knowledge is so, so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I only recently thought about it, like, gave any thinking to it. And I think when I had my own kids, I've realized how difficult it has been for my parents to do it. I up to that point, I didn't really, I knew I knew why they did it, but I never even considered how difficult it was for them. And when that, it was did they have a choice to do it differently? Probably. There was always a choice, but it was one of the most difficult choices to take at that point, but the one that was the most guaranteed in a way, 20 years ago. So yeah, definitely. There is really, everything is why, I think.
Yeah.
Everything is why.
Well,
How can you
that's,
do
yeah,
anything? How can
Simon
you stick
Sinek,
to it?
he's, yeah,
Yeah.
Simon
Everything is
Sinek is
about
big
why.
into the finding your why, like what is at the
Yeah.
core of what you do and why you do it. I know we touched on before we started recording this idea of prejudice and bias that exists.
Mm,
So when you're looking to grow your career, when you're looking to progress, when you're looking to apply for new jobs, and the type of bias, I think, and it's whether it's unconscious or not. Like, to me, I'd argue that if you're looking at someone's name and you're like, that's not an Irish sounding name, not going to interview that person, or
mm,
whatever the case might be, that's not unconscious bias. That's like a conscious decision that I'm deliberately not going to interview that person.
yeah.
Maybe, to be fair, it is unconscious on some people's behalf because they're like, I don't know how to say that. So, yeah. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
on that type of experience that you had.
Thankfully, my experience has been quite positive. Whether I wasn't invited to for interview because my name now is Marta Smullen. Smullen is quite Irish sounding. It's through my husband, but like, my maiden name is Kensler, and that definitely doesn't sound like Irish. Neither does it sound like Polish. It probably sounds like German, but definitely doesn't sound like Irish. Whether I have not been invited for to an interview because of my surname, maybe, I don't know. I'll never find out.
Mm,
But once I was invited for an interview, and once I was invited for kind of started the interview process, I always found it very fair.
yeah.
I always found it in the workplaces. I also found it very, very fair, and I've never felt like I'm being discriminated, or discrimination is probably a big word, but there is a bias against me.
Mm,
Um, Now, what I will say is, and that's in relation to everything, but also the fact that you are not Irish working in Ireland, for example, is it's so important to find the right place,
yeah.
where it's just so important to find the right place that allows you to be your authentic self.
Mm,
And what I will say to the question is that not every single not in every single place I felt I can be authentic self. And
yeah.
a huge part of my authenticity comes from being Polish.
Yeah.
So not every place I felt like I could be my authentic self. So maybe that is bias, I don't know. But the
You kind of had to cover
yeah,
yourself up or check
yeah.
yourself at the door when you came in, be a bit more Irish. Yeah, something like
What
that.
way do I speak? How do I phrase this?
Yeah.
Polish people are very blunt,
Yeah.
very
Okay.
direct.
Yeah.
We are, yes, and Irish people might not be as direct. They're definitely not.
Oh, Irish
N-
people skirt
No,
around what they want to say and expect people to read between the
exactly.
lines. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I used to go into boardroom and just be like, well, so what's happening here is this, and that. That's what we need to do. And like, I felt like people most of the time were grateful for me actually summarizing it like that. But that's the places that allowed me to be my authentic self. And the two places that I've been the most successful in, when I reflect back on them, I do see that there were the two places that I felt the most myself in. And the fact that my difference was celebrated, and it was definitely not used, you know, I felt I could do it. I felt like I could just be 100% myself in those two
Mm.
places. And it
Yeah.
always worked in my advantage.
Yeah.
Um, so that's definitely the case. And I always will say it, find your place, and don't be afraid to keep changing and looking until you find it, because finding the right place is just helps so much to nearly fast forward that career for you,
Yeah.
because you just found the right people that understand you, that they don't mind you not being 100% perfect in
Yeah.
it. I don't sound, when we're in a boardroom, do I sound like an Irish person? No, I don't. I probably stick to the more simpler language, which is most of the time even better, because there is no point overcomplicating things.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely there is part of that where, they accepted me, and they didn't mind me representing their company with my authentic self, and that's always paid back
Yeah.
both ways the best, because when you're not your authentic self and you don't really like it, it doesn't serve you well, it doesn't serve the company well.
Yeah.
So keep looking until you find it.
Yeah.
That's
And
all I say.
I've I've done research on this, and the toll that masking your real self takes, it takes a lot of energy, and it's energy
Mm,
that is diverted from performance at your role, because you're masking, you're so busy pretending to be someone else that it takes so much energy. And I love that advice of keep looking. I was so lucky in my career that I found, and I was talking about these earlier today on someone else's podcast, but two very specific companies that just had it all right. And I felt like I could be my absolute true self and got recognized for that. There are other
yes.
places where I felt like I got along very well, but I wasn't necessarily recognized for that, for being myself. Um, so I think what those being in those two companies really taught me was that there are places out there that are a really good fit, and then subsequently being in organizations that weren't, it's really jarring because you notice a huge difference in the culture or how you feel about yourself. And so I think what I'm trying to say with this is I love what you're saying about just keep looking. If you feel like there's some, you're like, this is not really the right place for me, keep looking, because there's going to be something else out there where you feel like you can be your really authentic self, and that you will be recognized, celebrated, and rewarded for being yourself and what you bring to the table in all your uniqueness. So
Yeah.
I love that as a piece of advice.
Absolutely. And I think once you've been in that kind of place, it's hard to accept anything else.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with you. I also had two places where I really, really felt 100% accepted. That's the two places I was the most successful in.
Yeah.
And in other
But it's
places, it was
interesting, isn't
okay.
it?
But
So
it is, really
you can
is.
be successful and be yourself at the same time, whereas a lot of people think maybe that they do have to mask themselves in some way, that they have to cover up, that they have to pretend to be someone else, that they have to check themselves at the door.
Mm,
And then when they're rewarded for that, then it reinforces maybe that behavior. So as you progress through the ranks, as you climb the career ladder, you have to do even more masking because you haven't
yeah.
been celebrated for being your authentic self.
Yeah, but there's a huge credit to the senior leadership in those two firms where they created that environment, because I think an employee gives themselves a permission to be authentic themselves when they feel they're in the environment where they can do it.
Yeah.
And I for for a long time, the I don't know, the 15 years back, I was trying to pretend I don't know, I don't even know how, because obviously, 15 years ago, now I can't pretend I'm Irish, let alone the 15 years ago. But for some reason, I thought in order to be successful, I need to act like Irish, I need to speak like Irish person, have the same sense of humor. Although actually, our sense of humor maybe might just change, and I'm very Irish, But it was only until I walked into my second job, which then turned out to be my long-term training practice, where I don't know what it was. It was led by two ladies, and they just created an environment that I felt safe. I
Yeah.
didn't felt challenged. My language didn't feel challenged. I didn't feel like I'm laughed at. I felt, we had many jokes when I said something funny, and I said many funny things. I'll tell you them after we stop recording there. But it's it didn't feel like I'm being laughed at. I'm being laughed with. If that makes it was just
Yeah.
it was this feeling of safe. I feel
Yeah.
safe in here. I
Yeah.
can just let my guard down. I can be myself. I can ask any question. I can ask them to, if there is an important email to send out, I can ask them to read it, and there will be no embarrassment in it, or try to, you know, help them ask them to help me to phrase something. It was that feeling I had.
That
Um,
it's okay. It's
that it's
okay to
okay.
ask for help.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And then I was really, really lucky in my one of the jobs where I kind of did that step from manager to senior leader. He was there for 6 years, and that company also created that amazing environment where, I walked into a boardroom not scared.
Yeah.
And when you are doing it not in your native language, it's hard not to be scared.
Yeah.
And I walked into that boardroom not scared, and a huge
Mm.
credit to them, still great friends of mine.
Yeah.
Um,
And what do you
yeah.
think both of those companies did differently? Like, what did those senior leaders do specifically to create that environment?
Um, I think in both companies, a lot of times it's just a feeling that I had. I think there was a lot of diversity on the board. I think there were a lot of people of different ages, a lot of people of gender, and in the second one I've mentioned, there was 7 of us on the leadership team. 2 were owners, so we can count them out. They always will be there. They were amazing. But there was 5 of us, and 3 were women, 2 were
Mm.
men. So there was a
Yeah.
lot of that. That the
Yeah.
first training practice was the department I was in was also female led. Not to say that men don't create that environment. I'm just saying when we have diversity, I think we are accepting even more diversity, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So in both companies, people not from Ireland were a lot of those positions were occupied by non-Irish people. It was one of those places where your qualification and your skills were more important to where you're from, how old are you,
Yeah.
and where you're from.
Yeah.
I say where you from twice probably, but it's just one of those things that you felt that what it's more important, and how you approach a problem and how you communicate with your colleagues was much more important than who you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was one of those things.
Brilliant.
Huge credit to them, and as I said, I'm great friends with them, and I'm hoping to keep it like that.
Great. Marta, is there anything else that you wanted to get across today that we haven't necessarily covered yet before we wrap things up?
um No, just an advice. Keep it as a journey. Anyone who
Yeah.
is in that process, keep it as a journey. I'm still on it. I don't really like the word journey, but like keep
It's
it as a
funny that word
process.
journey. It brings up
Yeah,
these
it's everywhere
connotations with
now.
some people, I think. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a process. Don't self-reject yourself. That's
Yeah.
the advice number 2. And just keep going. There are plenty of places out there that are very welcoming, and you will be able to be yourself in it.
Yeah.
And just keep going.
Yeah.
You will be surprised what you can do when you
Yeah.
actually put your mind to it.
And I think the big takeaway for me from our conversation is this idea that if you are your authentic self, it actually will help you to fast track your career. You'll actually accelerate
Absolutely.
your progress by being yourself rather than if you're trying to pretend to be someone or something else that you're not. Marta, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
I knew you were going to ask me that, so I thought about it. So I'm going just to repeat it, and maybe in a shorter version, because we talked about it a lot. When you're working in the organization that allows you to be your authentic self,
Yeah.
that's what happier it means. I think it ticks all the boxes
Yeah.
for me. When you feel like, I don't mean safe physically, but safe emotionally.
Hmm.
In those places, when you feel safe, and you can express yourself, you can ask questions, you can just be yourself. Um, as I said, those are the 2 places I was the happiest in, definitely.
Brilliant. And if people
Yeah.
want to reach out, if they want to connect, want to learn more about what you do, what's the best place they can do that?
So LinkedIn is probably the platform I use the most. So it's Marta Smullen in LinkedIn. You can find me there. And also, I haven't mentioned that, but I have my own podcast as well. And that's the part of coming out of my comfort zone myself as well. In the last year, I started my own podcast. So anyone who is interested in um I suppose all the topics around making women more visible. I
Hmm.
invite everyone to find me on Spotify or on Apple Podcast. The podcast itself is called Invisible to Visible. It's making women more visible. That's the team. So you can listen more to my voice there.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing those insights that I think will be really useful for people, not just from a language perspective, but I think generally in a shifting of mindset, stretching comfort zone, all of that kind of thing. So really, really appreciate you sharing your time and wisdom today. Thank you.
Thank you, Aoife.